good morning, and I first of all want to thank the Canadian government for hosting this third Ukraine conference and also for inviting me. I'm a former member of the European Parliament since Tuesday. I'm without any mandate and so free person. Also, after leaving my job in the European Parliament, I will continue to cooperate with friends of Ukraine, not only in the European Parliament and Brussels, but if possible around the world. And this conference gives me a good opportunity to enter the next phase of my job, which I try to do for a democratic, free and sovereign Ukraine. Today is my task, and I took it with great honor, to moderate an interesting panel of experts, with a kind of new challenge, or newly discovered challenge for our democratic societies. So I think in this audience here in Toronto, everybody is quite aware about the warfare of Vladimir Putin against Ukraine. Everybody is aware about the conventional war taking place on Ukrainian territory. Some even know about other places suffering in Eastern Europe from Russian aggression and occupation. Georgia to be mentioned, Armenia, Moldova is a bit different, but even in the Western Balkans, in Europe, we experienced during the last years more and more interference of Russia, because Vladimir Putin is following the idea to make Moscow great again and is very much reconnecting his strategies to what was once the Moscow's empire in Europe. Today we want, or I want together with the panelists to shed light on the not so well-known challenges in the hybrid warfare of Vladimir Putin, targeting not only Ukraine, targeting a lot Ukraine, but targeting also more and more democratic societies all over Europe, even outside of the European Union. And we have brought together some interesting people who are trying to respond to the challenges of hybrid warfare, especially to the challenges of the war on information. The first I would like to introduce to you, who speaks to us, is Ruslan Deyniychenko. He is Deyniychenko. He's executive director of STOPFAKE. So I think the least I can say about STOPFAKE is that STOPFAKE is the group in the civil society of Ukraine in which volunteers already during Maidan started to detect and to dismantle targeted disinformation organized by the Kremlin. And today I would say that famous groups like Bidenko would not be able to do what they are doing, for example, on MH17 and the investigations for the Netherlands, if they would not be able to rely on groups like STOPFAKE. And I would like to ask Ruslan whether he thinks that on this war on information, are we today already able to make use of your experience in Ukraine? Is Ukraine really seen by other countries, for example, in the EU or on the EU level? Is Ukraine really seen as a living lab to understand Russian threats and to find answers to Russian threats? Please, Ruslan.
Yeah, first of all, Okay. First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to be here. I'm from the STOPFAKE project, and we are a group of Ukrainian journalists who 5 years ago, not directly during the Maidan, but in March of 2014, who gathered together and decided to do something with the flood of disinformation that we saw on Russian television. We do debunk, we monitor Russian media, of course, we debunk the fakes they produce and disseminate. And also now we do a lot of projects in media literacy and research. And answering your question, it's 5 years later and we still work. And unfortunately, we still don't know how to protect our countries and our citizens from this flood of disinformation and influence that Russian and not just Russian media produce and disseminate. First of all, we think that Russian disinformation campaign never stopped and it continues. And actually, Russia reinforced their efforts to influence Ukraine and other countries. And I wanted to remind you, yesterday President Zelensky in his speech mentioned that he wants to communicate with the people with Ukrainians who live in the occupied part of Donbass, and to say them that they are part of Ukraine and this part of Donbass is also Ukraine. It's very necessary, it's a good idea, but I want him to remind that we need to care not just about people who live in occupied part of Donbass, but we need to communicate with Ukrainians who live in the rest of the country. Because, as I said, Russia reinforced their efforts to influence Ukrainians, and it was very, very obvious from these recent elections, president elections. What we saw from our monitoring, that of course they did not support Mr. Zelensky. They had their own candidate, it was Mr. Bidenko, and it seems from our observations that their primary objective was to remove from the office Mr. Poroshenko, and they achieved these goals. And a huge contribution to this achievement belongs to media, of course, not just Russian, but to media. So this is one of the evidence that probably their efforts to influence Ukraine through media was probably the most successful part of their hybrid war against Ukraine. Also, we think that their objectives were to weaken support of our international partners, including the United States, Canada, and the European Union. And what we see after elections, that again they reinforce their efforts. We see hours and hours of programming on Russian TV networks, major Russian TV networks dedicated to Ukraine. Just example from yesterday. You probably know that yesterday 14 Russian sailors died in the accident with a submarine, but the main topic of discussion on Russian major political talk show with Mr. Solovyov yesterday was not about this accident. It was about Bandera and Shukhevich. If they deserve to be heroes of Ukraine, that was the major topic of their discussion. And hours of programming, and of course they corrected their information policy, and what we see now, they cleared a little bit their news. So now we don't see such a brutal face as a story about crucified boy or Russian-speaking slaves in their news. They moved all this propaganda, all these stories to political talk shows, to entertainment content. So now formally they are following these standards, but again, it's hours and hours of programming. The aim of this programming is to influence Ukraine, to basically to brainwash Ukrainians. And what else also we see You probably know that a year ago, almost a year ago, Russia got control over two major news TV networks in Ukraine. This year, they added another TV channel to this collection, and they are still in the market. So for us, it's another evidence that they invest a lot of resources in this to reinforce this propaganda machine to influence Ukraine. Okay, so basically what we see from our monitoring, from our work, we see that their primary objective is still to get over control of Ukraine. They want to weaken our support of Ukrainian institutions from our citizens. They want to weaken our international support. And probably the last thing I would like to mention is about that some Ukrainian media, so-called oligarchs who own TV networks, during recent elections they tried to use the same techniques to achieve their own goals. I think it's time to start thinking how we can limit their control over media. And I was extremely happy yesterday when I heard that British government made this announcement about support of independent Ukrainian media. I think that independent Ukrainian media, including public television, they deserve our support. They produce unbiased content, and I think they deserve to have better audience, much larger audience to inform our people. And I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so far. So I'm not 100% convinced that the results of recent presidential elections are mainly due to Russian influence, but I'm convinced that Russian information war really targets the audiences in Ukraine and other European countries and tries to destroy trust in governments, parliaments and democratic structures.